When I was growing up, my dad would always tell me and my siblings about a kid that was from the same neighborhood as him. My siblings and I never really believed him. I mean, the story seems so preposterous that there's no way that it could have been true. And I think we all can agree that old people tend to lie sometimes.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
But I could not believe my eyes when my 10-year-old self hopped on the computer, got on Google, and realized that everything he had said was true. All of his claims were validated. This is a story that even from the early days really blew my mind. I mean, it has everything: money, passion, violence. It's even got murder. And I think we can agree on one thing. There's some really bizarre people out there, and they can do some really crazy things. But it's rare that a true story is almost unbelievable.
Unbelievable! Unbelievable!
This one is the tale of a boy, half man, half lobster. And you guessed it, his nickname was the Lobster Boy. Very original, huh? This boy was so notorious that his shocking character would go on to appear in Deadpool comics and hit television series American Horror Story. Hey guys, this is Jared from History Bits, the channel where we hope to make you laugh a lot, but occasionally have to touch on some pretty depressing subject matter. Today, we're going to discuss Grady Stiles Jr., the man that was born with claws instead of hands. Hence the bizarre name, Lobster Boy. If you haven't heard of him, this video is bound to blow your mind. But if you have, stick around because you might learn something new. Grady Stiles Jr. was born in 1937 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Doctors stated seeing Jameis Winston at the hospital the day of his birth. But it turns out that he's actually more of a crab guy. What? Stiles grew up in a small town outside of Pittsburgh called Butler. You guys have probably never heard of Butler, PA.
Take a look at what happened.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. God, news cycle's quick, huh? Let's get back to Grady. Sadly, he had a rare genetic condition known as ectrodactyly. Just put the graphic up.
Ectrodactyly.
This one-of-a-kind deformity causes hands to develop into claw-like appendages. Grady had no fingers or thumb on either hand, and his feet were similarly disfigured. He inherited this unique mutation from his father, Grady Stiles Sr., who also had the same lobster-like hands and feet. According to his father, the Stiles family had a long history of this condition, dating all the way back to 1840. 6 generations of that condition is a tough hand to be dealt. Grady Sr. coined the name Lobster Man and was a sideshow performer in carnivals and circuses. And soon, his son would follow in very similar footsteps.
But I don't know if footsteps was the right choice there.
But this didn't stop him from using his arms and legs for various tasks. He developed his own unique techniques for eating, writing, and even playing instruments. However, his life was destined for one thing and one thing only: the circus. These deformities would become two things: the source of his pain and ultimately his ticket to fame. In the 1940s, the entire Stiles family started traveling with the carnival, which became a fan favorite attraction. People called them the Lobster Family. They were part of a so-called freak show lineup. We've come a long way. I mean, come on, you gotta agree. They worked alongside other strange attractions like the world's tallest man and the Elephant Man. Remember the Elephant Man? Ooh, wouldn't want to get in the ring with that guy. Many of the carnival sideshows would spend time in Gibsonton, Florida. This became the Stiles family hub. At this point, you're probably thinking, you know what, I feel bad for the Lobster family. But check this out. Working only 6 months out of the year, the Stiles family averaged between $60,000 to $80,000 a season. And guess what? That's like $1.7 million today. But relax. This isn't how you're gonna get rich. Put the phone down, you're not calling a plastic surgeon. It's not all sunshine and rainbows when you work in the surprisingly lucrative carnival business. As a young man, Grady Jr. likely enjoyed some of the attention he received while making money, but at the same time, he faced exploitation from the young age of 7. Performers in these sideshows were often subjected to grueling hours and horrible working conditions. I mean, especially for a 7-year-old. That's no way to live, to be in a cage while other people point and laugh at you. Most were treated as little more than an act. Their worth was defined by ticket sales instead of humanity. And if circus life weren't tough enough, young Grady's life at home wouldn't be much easier. It's said that Stiles Jr. was raised in a home where his father was a harsh and often cruel figure. Grady Sr. was reportedly physically and mentally abusive, which would end up laying the foundation for Grady's behavior as he aged. His early experience with physical abuse and ridicule no doubt shaped the deeply troubled man he would go on to become. And sadly, this is where it gets dark. While Grady Jr. was on display during a show, a young woman named Mary took notice of him. Mary had no deformities, and she worked in the same carnival as a grifter. After running away from home, she joined the carnival to escape the abuse of her family.
My God, this is a depressing one. There's abuse all over this puppy. Yikes.
She developed feelings for the Lobster Boy and would go on to become his wife in the 1970s. The two of them would go on to have 2 daughters, one of which was born with the lobster claw syndrome. Around this time, alcohol use and domestic abuse became a key characteristic of Grady. He would often drink heavily and lash out violently towards his family. His daughter, Kathy, recalled how he would frequently beat his wife and terrorize his children, apparently choking his wife on a regular occurrence. And this abusive choking was done with his lobster claw hands. Yeah, I'm not even trying to be funny. This is just really scary. Someone with his upper body strength, he was in a wheelchair or would drag himself across the ground. He had incredibly strong forearms and biceps and would use his claws to choke his family members and intimidate them any single way that he could. And it's like being choked is bad enough, but when you have somebody that literally has a lobster claw locked around your neck, I mean, that's horrifying. Unfortunately, he used that strength to torment those closest to him. This finally hit a breaking point during a fight with Mary in 1973. On this gruesome occasion, he supposedly used his claws to rip out his wife's birth control IUD. Oh my God. I cannot imagine that pain. That is absolutely disgusting. He was a monster. And in less shocking news, this urged Mary to file for divorce, which she immediately did after this altercation. I think I can see where she's coming from on that one. After leaving, she would get into another relationship and marry a guy named Harry Glenn Newman. He was another freak show carnival worker and was known as the smallest man in the world. Mary, really knew how to pick him, huh? But this is the days before Tinder and Hinge and Bumble, to where every guy was expected to be 6'5" with a perfect hairline, built like a Greek god, work in finance, and drive a Range Rover. So I don't think we should really fault her for some of the dating decisions that she made. Outside of the family, Grady was just as violent. Stiles was notorious for threats against others, earning him a reputation for ruthlessness. His explosive temper worsened when he drank alcohol. This rage could be directed at strangers or even fellow performers. His violence became so well known that some people in the circus would fear him more than his appearance. Somehow, the worst is still yet to come. In the 1970s, Stiles' daughter Kathy became engaged to a man. Grady was incredibly controlling and wasn't really a big fan of his daughter Kathy's choice on who she chose to marry. The exact reason for Stiles' hatred towards his daughter's fiancé are unknown. Some reports suggest that Grady may have felt his family was too good for the fiancé, or that Kathy was in some way defying his authority. In 1978, Stiles' anger towards the fiancé escalated. The night before the wedding, Grady took matters into his own hands, inviting the fiancé over, and then subsequently shooting him in cold blood, murdered him for absolutely no reason at all.
I just want to talk to him.
Dad, this is ridiculous.
I just want to talk to him. I just want to talk to him. I just want to talk to him.
It is not his fault.
I just want to shoot him. I just want to talk to him.
You can't shoot him.
And you were worried about meeting your future father-in-law? Grady was arrested and soon went to trial. Throughout the trial, he showed no remorse for his actions whatsoever. After being found guilty, he approached the judge. He pointed out that he couldn't possibly be imprisoned due to his disability. He slated that no jail could handle his deformity, and to confine him to prison would be cruel and unusual punishment. By this point, his liver was ravaged by cirrhosis, and he had terrible emphysema after smoking cigarettes for decades on end. The judge realized they had no counterargument, So they let him off with 15 years probation instead, and he went home freely. Diddy might need this guy's lawyer. Yeesh.
Pretty impressive.
This insane stroke of luck would not change Grady's behavior in the slightest. He went on to remarry a second woman named Sherry in the 1980s. If this guy can get married twice, you have no excuse. I mean, we can all find someone out there for us if this guy got married 2 separate times. Actually 3 times, but you'll see in a minute. Grady would go on to have 2 more children with Sherry, but that's not really the point of this video, so we're just gonna, we're gonna move on. Because Grady continued to abuse Sherry, and that relationship fizzled out pretty quickly. You're seeing this pattern, right? And then, somehow, some way, Mary went back to Grady. After escaping that abusive relationship, going to another man and having multiple kids, she went back to Grady. I mean, what are we doing? They would get remarried in 1989. And this is where a story of abuse meets that inevitable climax. The violence and abuse never stopped. Neighbors described regular screams and violence coming from the Stiles residence on a nightly basis. Police would often stop by after being called, but this is back in the day when domestic abuse wasn't really looked at the same way as it is now, so they'd give me a, "Oh, you guys, you crazy kids, figure that out. Quit farting around in here." Yeah, not good. One night, while in a heated argument with Mary, his pregnant daughter Kathy tried to intervene. When she did, he began to beat her mercilessly. He beat her so badly that he forced her into early labor. Sadly, the baby was also born with lobster claw syndrome. It was at this point that Mary and the rest of the kids were officially done, like they were not going to take anything else from Grady. They hated the lobster man of the house and wanted him dead. Sorry, I'll go back to being serious. My bad. So in 1992, Mary and her son, from the marriage to the tiny guy, hired a neighbor named Chris Wyant to kill Stiles for $1,500. Most of the time you might ask a neighbor to help you move or mount a TV or something like that, but Mary just figured, I'll ask this 17-year-old to come over and murder my husband, no biggie. She paid the 17-year-old neighbor to shoot Grady in his trailer. How about that? This guy's making like a couple mil a year in 2024 dollars and still living in a trailer. I mean, I'm not hating on anybody that lives in a trailer by any means. I just respect the frugality. He didn't let all the money go to his head. And it all happened on November 29th, 1992. As Stiles smoked a cigarette watching television on the sofa, Chris Wyant entered his home with a semi-automatic pistol. He then shot Grady in the head twice, killing him. I mean, if anybody's ever had it coming, it was probably Grady. With Grady dead, Mary and her accomplices were questioned by investigators. This is when her son Glenn eventually cracked and spilled the beans about the family's plan. Mary took complete ownership of the murder, but pointed to self-defense for the abuse. Kind of similar to the Menendez brothers a little bit. This had little impact on the verdicts. But I guess that's what happens when you don't have a lawyer as good as Grady's. Should have hired this guy as the lawyer. Chris, the gunman, was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 27 years in prison. Mary was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 12 years in prison. Mary's son was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. This is just a lose-lose situation. I mean, pretty much everybody involved's life is completely ruined. Grady's death marked the end of an era in the circus world. His physical condition brought both fascination and ridicule. While it offered financial rewards, this was also accompanied by emotional and psychological costs. Ultimately, the Lobster Boy became a villain. His condition, while physically deforming, was not the root cause of his criminal behavior. Instead, it was his inability to cope with the internal challenges that came with his condition, and a history of substance abuse that ran in his family. In the end, the Lobster Boy's life was defined by violence and terror, his criminal actions leading to his eventual death. The tragic irony of the story is that in his own way, Grady became a victim of the same cruelty and violence that he inflicted onto others. While he may have been born into a world that saw him as a freak, it was his own actions that defined him as such.